Hey, I'm Jill Deacon. Thanks so much for tuning in again. Maybe this is our second episode. So it may be your first time checking out A Love Affair with the Unknown podcast. But if it's not, thanks for coming back. A Love Affair with the Unknown, if you are new to this situation here, is a podcast about managing uncertainty, talking about dealing with the hard things that all of us are going through in life, particularly the unknowns. There is a lot of courage and strength to be found from leaning into unknowns, even though they don't feel that comfortable. So, talking about it with some really interesting people is the way that we're getting through this. I've certainly had a lot of unknowns in my own life. Had breast cancer twice. Had to deal with long COVID for 2 very long years, and a whole lot of uncertainty around all of that. So, this is a project that comes from the heart, and I'm super glad that you're here with me listening. Today's conversation is a goodie. This is a conversation with Ian Brown, such a beloved Canadian author and writer and journalist who writes and thinks a lot about the unknowns of getting older. You've made no secret of your age, obviously, but here's a way of asking you sort of about it differently. How old would you be if you didn't know how old you were?
Oh, I think I would be the same age that I it ranges, I guess, between about 29 and 39. Uh, I think
Amazing how many people lean on 29, isn't it? What is it about that age? We all
well,
say
I think it's that's the last remnants of your most vigorous physical self. And 39 I think is the peak of, or maybe not the peak, but it is when I began to peak in terms of my awareness of the world around me and my engagement with the world in every single aspect that I wanted to be engaged in, and I wanted to be engaged in as many as I could.
Mm.
That's what it goes back to. And I must say that when you know I'm still working at the Globe and Mail, so I'm not the oldest person at the Globe, but I'm one of the oldest people at the Globe. And so I'm 70, yeah, well, nearly
Ish.
71. So yeah, 70-ish. I'm nearly 71. And there are people at the Globe who are younger than 31, right? They're like 25, 26. And and to my one of the nicest compliments that has ever been paid to me, and I only realized this recently, they come around and they talk by the desk, and they're incredibly fast and incredibly capable, and they know how to use every bit of data scraping technology. They know, technologically, in terms of speed, in terms of getting to the goal, they outstrip me. It's like some lame old horse next to Secretariat. It's terrible. And then on Thursday afternoons, they will come by and they'll say, "We're all going for a beer. You gonna come?" And sometimes I can go and sometimes I can't. But I try to go. And one of the greatest compliments I've ever had is their, I was gonna say willingness to, socialize with me. But I would say it's even sometimes even their eagerness, and it makes me feel fantastic because I get to engage with them in, and when I am in, this is a long, long way of saying what I'm going to say, but when I'm with them, I often think to myself, this is amazing. Like they're 30, 35, 40 years old, and we are equals.
Mm.
We are and we're not equals in many ways. They are much, much better at what they do than I am. Plus they're news writers, right? They produce this stuff on a daily basis that is beyond my capability and my ken. But when we're talking, I think, wow, this is fantastic. We are the same. We are equal. And then I realize you're not the same. You are 30, you're 3 decades older than them. Or I'll be walking down the street. It happened to me this morning. I went down town to pick something up. I get out, I see this person coming out of the Starbucks. And I held the door thinking, look at this poor old guy. Like he's gray, he's got a bit of a pot. He's got that forward leaning walk thing, that goes on that I just every time I see it, I think, do not do that. And And I thought, "Wow, you know, poor old guy." And then as I watched him walk away, I thought, "He is 50 years old. He is 20 years younger than you." I mean,
Are you always running that calculus of age? I mean, are you always sort of positioning yourself? Because there was a line that you wrote in 60 uh, about how much society likes to remind us of our age. You wrote, "Everyone over 60 feels the public prejudice against them." So do you feel that's implied and you kind of internalized it and are always sort of running some sort of, "Do I deserve to be here at the bar with the youngins because I'm old and everyone knows it?" Like, are you always mindful of that?
I am steadily mindful of it. I'm not always intimidated by it. Sometimes very intimidated by it. I went to a club. I went to dinner with some younger friends of mine, hipster guys, really hipster guys, like really top of the line hipster types. And, and afterwards, they said, "We're going to go to a club." This was on Geary Street in Toronto, which is so hip that, it changes your DNA when you go onto the street. Anyway, they went to this club. It was on the second floor. It cost $75 to get in. And all everybody did for the first hour and a half was stand there chatting, and there was music going boom, 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 the same, like the same musical phrase repeated 150 times, and then it changes. It goes boom, 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 and then it goes boom, 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 boom. This, and I said, "What is this?" And they said, "Oh, yeah, it really gets going around midnight or 1 o'clock." I thought, Jesus wept. This is the so then I was intimidated. I thought I shouldn't be here. I want to go home. I want to get my book, or I want to watch the end of, Say Nothing or something like that, or see my dog, or see my wife, or talk to my daughter or something. But so I am steadily aware of it, not always intimidated, but often intimidated by it. I think I think you've hit the nail on the head that you're constantly playing out, do I belong here? Because so much of society, and I don't say this with bitterness. I mean, I used to do it too, and I'm ashamed that I used to do it. I remember my dad.
You used to do what? You used to clock people's age and decide
Yes.
what category to fit them into?
Oh, I remember driving with my father when my dad was an old guy, was in his 90s, and I was driving him on a Saturday to have a beer. He lived in a retirement home not too far from here, and he used to come over on Saturday, watch the golf. We'd have lunch together. It was fantastic. I really got to. It was after my mom died. I really got to know him better than I did, and I knew him pretty well already. And some old guy in some, Ford Fairlane in front of us was, making a left turn, and it was taking like a year and a half for the guy to turn left. So I went bang on the horn like this, and my dad turns to me and he says, "Ian, he's an old man." And I said, "Well, he- that's no excuse or something." And I am so ashamed of saying that now
Mm.
because I mean, not that I guess, I am sometimes in that position, but I was watching Jimmy Kimmel, and I really I admire Kimmel and all those guys, but I really admire Kimmel because he's so much smarter than he lets on,
Mhm.
and he's a very funny guy, and he can play low and high, and he's been getting more politically conscious as well, which impresses me. But I was listening to his monologue, I don't know, 6 months ago. He made 7 jokes about an old guy who was over 50. And I thought, I mean, and they were funny jokes. I mean, I was laughing, but the, it, he didn't even, it didn't even register with anybody that he was making these ageist jokes. And I think I would call it prejudice, but I think it's fundamentally fear. It's like the fear of disability. People are afraid of people with disabilities, and
Right.
so they tend not to think of them. And people are afraid, deathly afraid, so to speak, of age and dying. And
I mean, as evidenced by you going to the club with the younger guys and, and putting up with the dreadful, music and and maybe flinching at hearing those Kimmel jokes, you this is something I read you say in 60 as well. You said that you felt vaguely compelled to be sedate and proper, but that everybody wants to smash that prejudice as well. So tell me about that urge that you feel to fight against the fear. It's almost like you want to say, no, you don't have to judge me and fear this state that I'm in. It's coming for you too. And by the way, it's okay. And there's a lot of good things about it. I mean, maybe that's even why you're writing these books. I don't know. But tell me
Yeah.
about that sort of pushback to say, no, fuck off. Just because I, take a little longer to make a left turn, I'm still driving or whatever.
Well, yes. I mean, ideally, that is what one does. One pushes back against it and one changes people's minds. However, one is also facing the very convincing proof that one is different and that one has fallen off the cliff of regularity, normality, I mean mental regularity, although perhaps other kinds of regularity as well. That hasn't happened yet. But this the forgetting of names. I mean, in my conversations with the 40-year-olds at work, I'm constantly saying, it's like, what's his name? The guy, with the blue hat who was married to, her name was Jill's, and, he was a
Yes.
drunkard. And
They all play
John
that
Turner.
game.
That's right, John
Yes.
Turner.
Yes.
So that kind of thing is so present that I'm inclined to believe that, yes, I am indeed uh, changing and altering. And I want, ideally, I'd like to create a world where not only is the inchoate, stressed out, misdirected energy of youth accepted for what it is, but the seeking, searching, it's like you're walking on a tightrope, that isn't attached at the other end, but somehow it stays tight-ish. And you walk along that rope because you don't know when the thing that is, it's coming. And you don't know when it's coming. It could happen in 5 minutes. It could happen during this podcast. It could happen in 20 years. And that's a hell of a lot of insecurity to live with. That's a that's a huge unknown abyss, And I don't necessarily mean a dark thing, but it's an emptiness, right? Ahead. So I think it's a lovely idea to break the stereotype. And we should all try and break that stereotype just as we should try and break all the other stereotypes. But I think it's hard because the pressure, the evidence is so gripping and unavoidable as well that you kind of got to maintain two minds at once. I'm I am old, but I'm not old. I'm not old, but I am old. I am what did Salinger in his he kept in Franny and Zooey, those great characters, he wanted them to go fast and slow at once.
Hmm.
That
And
you embody that when you get old.
and maybe the what you get when you combine fast and slow is the present, right? Like you get right here. And that, I mean, that's something I think about in in all aspects of life. The idea that so much is outside of our control, whether it's aging or health challenges or whatever, but the what we can maybe influence or decide is more appropriate word than control, is how we approach that, how we deal with that. Um, and I know you wrote a lot in 60 about paying attention,
Mhm.
about being present to the details. Tell me more about that. And again, having, you did 10 years of being in your 60s. And I'm curious about how that, what you thought was a strategy, a helpful strategy, and a source of comfort, just being present to things that are satisfying in the moment, because as you say, you don't know where the end of that tightrope comes. Tell me about what that looked like and what it looks like now, leaning into 70s, the idea of being present to the small details of right now.
I think it's a huge relief. If I mean, I am, uh, have always been a bit of a driven person, an ambitious person, probably more ambitious than I deserved to feel, but I was, wanted things. Um, and then you can't get those things starting around 60, I found. You can't always get
What
them.
things? What things can't you get when you're
Well,
60?
yeah, uh, everything from as crass as, somebody giving you a nice look on the street, uh, you know, seeing somebody you find attractive and maybe they find you attractive too. I don't know where that went, but it went on vacation a long time ago. Way sooner than I realized. It had been on vacation for 20 years by the time I noticed it was missing. I'd been, deluding myself for years. So stuff like that. Being able to bound down, not up the stairs 2 or 3 steps at a time, but down the stairs 2 or 3 steps at a time, holding on to the banisters and not giving a wit's worth of attention to what might possibly happen. You know, uh, uh, Not worrying about being on time or not being on time or what have I forgotten or going through the 5 things, have I got my hearing aids? Have I got my glasses? Have I got my wallet? Have I got my phone? Do I have my keys? Right? Because if any one of those things could lead to complete disaster. Uh, to forget that kind of uh, those are the things that you begin to pay attention to, and the antidote to that agonizing fear, which is what it is, I think, is to realize when you see something. I mean, this morning, I stepped outside and it's cold outside, or it was early this morning. It was about, I don't know, must have been minus 25. I mean, it was pretty frigid. And I was only wearing a shirt. I had to put the cans out, the garbage cans out, which I'd forgotten to do last night. And normally I would think to myself, garbage cans, but it was so cold, and it was so my whole I could feel my sleeves on my skin, because they were so cold, and I thought that is a cool and weirdly beautiful, maybe not beautiful, but distinctive thing to feel.
And
And I
you felt it in a way that you wouldn't have perhaps 20 years ago. You thought about it, you registered it, you were present for it.
Yeah, and
And
I wanted to write it down. I wanted to describe it. I wanted to paint a cold man, standing in the cold in his what how I don't know how you do it. There's a million ways you could do it. You could talk about it. You could stand there with your phone and make a little whatever you call those things, that TikTok thing.
TikTok.
You know, you could make one of I guess if you could figure out how to use the TikTok, you could do that. But you know, but that's for younger people.
Ask those folks at the office. Well, you remind me of heard Isabel Allende describe being in her 80s as her best decade yet. She said, "I'm so happy to be alive. I'm so happy to be here. And I'm so happy to be looking out the window at the ducks swimming in the pond." Is that a little bit about what that cold feeling of your shirt on your bare skin on a minus temperature morning? Is that
Yeah.
what that's like? Was there a happiness that you attached to that? Is
Well,
there a gratitude for, "I get to be here for this," that
yeah.
you that and what other than the fact that you aged, what do you think brought that ability to think that way on?
I think things become more valuable the scarcer they are, and once you start to realize that you don't have automatic access and facility to and with whatever it is you want to do, that a broken ankle is actually lays you up and takes longer to fix and hurts a bit, or that your eyesight is, you actually have to every time you want to read. So I went into a restaurant the other day on Baldwin Street in Toronto, an Asian restaurant, a noodle shop, and I didn't have my phone with me because I don't like to take my phone with me at lunch. I like to read, and I was eating alone, obviously, and or I should point out, uh, and, and I go in and I say, "Can I see the menu?" And the guy says, "Yeah, you can look at it on your phone if you're showing your phone at this, gizmo, the what do they call those things?
Oh, yeah, the URL that you what's that called? Oh my gosh, what's it
Whatever it's called. Yeah, exactly. Neither of us can
Scan.
remember. So, and I'm thinking, I don't have my phone.
QR code.
QR code, exactly. That was coming to me. So you know, and I'm thinking, wow, I don't know whether to resent the restaurant, to upbraid myself for, not having my phone, or to sit there and say, well, do you have a picture that and so the guy pulls out his own phone and he aims it at the QR code. And we both look at his phone and he's going, this is good. And I'm going, oh, great. I'll have that. I'll have the one with the brisket. That'd be delicious. So, it was in a weird way, a more intimate, and I think when I turned 60, I originally wanted to write a book called 50 because I thought half a century is, that's a good time. And, you start things start to change earlier than that. You peak brain activity at 28 sort of thing. Um, physically downhill from about 35 on. Your skin starts to, shrivel and collapse and turn into something else. But at the age, by the time you're 40, if you read the science, you're really on the way out. You're
Oh
you're
my
sort of
gosh,
refuse.
Ian.
No, well, this is what the science will tell you. But but at 50, I was too busy and I didn't do it. And at 60, I came out of writing 60 thinking, I can handle this. This is okay. What I have to remember is to be alert, to not worry about what other people think, as much. Uh, and I guess I've got to remember that everything in life at 60, they say you mustn't take any risks. But paradoxically, you have to take more risks, but you have to take them in a different way. But until you get to 60, you can do everything and you do it like that. At 60, you have to narrow what you're interested in and go deeper on it and take more risks on fewer things. That was my great revelation. I call it my great revelation. And I could at 60, I looked at it and I thought, I can do that. At 70, I wake up every morning and I think, "Oh my god." You know, "Oh my god, I am 70 years old." I yesterday I picked up the New York Times. There was a story about the longevity industry, supplements and, jumping into a ice bath and steaming your ears and all this kind of stuff that's supposed to make you live longer. And in the story it said, of course, the average American male lives to 78 years old. And I thought, 78? I thought it was 84, but it's 82 in Canada, And I'm like, "That's only 7 more years."
Oh my gosh.
But and it's I think if it's 82, well, that seems like, half a lifetime again, but and so it's much more existential now. Much, much more existential because I'm more aware of what I can't control and what might happen, and I see my friends dropping and my pals who won't backcountry ski with me anymore because it's too exhausting for them, who
Mm.
don't wanna go out and be too social anymore. I it's a graver challenge at 70. It's no less beatable, but it's no less beatable, but it's a graver challenge, I think.
And yet, you were kind of pointing out some of these fearful, "Oh my gosh, the end is on its way" things in 60. I'm just gonna call you out a little bit on I felt kind of a negativity about being that age, reading that book, that I was resisting, and I'm curious to understand that resistance. Is that the same thing we were talking about before, the general societal fear of, "I don't wanna become old, so I'm just gonna ignore it and kinda push it away and make fun of it." And is that my own version of that as I was resisting your very candid, description and fears of all these things that are not working anymore, the hardships that come with age? Because but what I'm also saying is that you're saying now what you said in the book 10 years ago, right? I guess it just gets worse?
Doesn't
Is
get
that or is it about like, are you paying more attention to the things you're losing than you Have to. I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm not giving you advice
certainly
'cause
the
I don't know
latter.
yet how to do this, but could that be also true?
Certainly the latter, that I've learned to pay attention, and the value of things has become impressed upon me. I'm less callow than I used to be, um, thankfully.
What are
So
tell me
that's part of it
what are the other changes that you've made? If you're less callow, perhaps is one of them, but what are the changes that you've made, you know, maybe when you turned 60 or in the last 10 years or whatever, as you age, that you're most proud of?
that I'm most proud of.
Yeah.
I think I'm a more caring person. I don't, when this is probably too personal, but when my wife,
It's never
Johanna,
stopped you before.
sorry,
That's never stopped you before.
when my wife, Johanna Schneller, who is herself an exceptionally talented writer, when she moved to Toronto from New York, where she was living, to live with me, I was writing a book. And after a week or two of she got a job at the Globe and Mail, and she I was writing the book at home in our apartment, and she would come in and she would say, "Hi, honey," or "Hi, Ian," or "How are you?" kind of thing. It's from the door, and she would come into my study and say hello. And after a week of this, I said to her, would you mind not saying hello when you come in? Would you mind waiting until I come out of the study and say hello to you because it interrupts my concentration and ruins my
The
work ethic
flow.
and
Mhm.
my connection to my art kind of thing. I wouldn't say that now if you paid me
Hmm.
because I like it when she comes in and says hello. It has become for me a reassurance, that I'm not quite alone. Yeah, when you die, I mean, that's what dying is, right? It's it's becoming ultimately alone. I mean, you just get lonelier and lonelier and lonely, and suddenly you're solitary, and then you're no longer here. And that's a pretty good definition of what dying is. I don't. She's the opposite of that, to me, and so that I've become more appreciative of that kind of thing, and I have become much more appreciative of physical capability. I mean, now to my I would never have admitted this 20 years ago, but I sometimes go to a trainer because I want to get my physical strength, not back, but I want to maintain it because from what I can see, you can have a lot of stuff, but if you don't have your physical strength, if you don't have some body mass, if you cannot go up and down the stairs with some confidence or without worrying that you're gonna pitch head over heel down to the bottom and be found splayed at the bottom by, your dog the next
Oh my
morning.
god, the scenes you run in your head, man.
Well, I'm just saying that
Yeah, yeah.
you 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 know, I'm so much more appreciative of a physical capability now. The ability to still open the door, put the key in the lock, play a bit of piano, paint a little bit.
Mm,
It's like those are
they're
gifts from
gifts.
whatever gods there are.
It's funny, you said that you wouldn't have admitted maybe 20 years ago having a personal trainer. Do you which made me wonder about, is there something about the ego, that is it a change in ego that is inevitable with aging? Aging burnishes away, scrapes it away and reduces it so that you are, you know, kinder to your lovely wife when she says a fond greeting at the door, and more willing to admit that you have to work hard to maintain these things. I mean, is that part of it?
I think ego is very important when you're younger. You need ego to get through the world, to survive, to make a living, to be in the world. I mean, you got to bash out there. And the ego it's your shield, right? As you get older, you realize that ego's not as effective as you thought it was, and you can let it drop away. But that doesn't mean you're giving up. I mean, you can still engage in the world and progress into the world, but you just don't do it with the same. unilateral, unidimensional, callous disregard for everybody else's opinion.
Hmm.
You know, you
I can't remember where I read this, but I wrote it down, and it's sort of what you're saying. If you grow older but no wiser, no more generous or thoughtful or kind or honest than you ever were, then elderhood will elude you. Which
uh,
is that's kind of what you're saying, right?
yeah, and I think it's why when I wrote 60, I would do these talks or give speeches or, promote the book, or people would call me up and ask me to come by and talk about it. And there was always one, and it was always a guy, hardly ever a woman, sometimes a woman, but hardly ever. But very often a guy, maybe a bit older than me. So I was 60, he might be 70, 75. And I would give my talk, which was somewhat amusing and I thought somewhat engaging. And one of these clods would stand up and say, "What are what are you complaining about? Talking about your emotions and how you feel or something? You just get up in the morning and you get it done and you go through, and you tough it out."
Huh.
And I thought, you are a horse's ass. Every time that guy, and he stood up at every single speech I ever gave, that you are a horse's ass. You are the kind of unconsciousness that I don't want to be. But it's that unconsciousness that we can power our way through this, that there's no such thing as aging, that there's no such thing as weakness, or a better word, fragility, because fragility is not weakness. Fragility is alertness. It's a kind of hyper alertness. And this denial that fragility exists at whatever uh, stage it emerges, and it emerges at every stage of our lives in different ways. It's crazy to deny it. Crazy. But, the it's like Trump. It's like that whole thing that is happening. It's the illusion of empire, right? We're the strongest. And the strongest get to do what they want, and the weakest succumb. And that's sort of the way we've divided the world of the aged versus the non-aged. You will succumb to us and we will dominate. When in fact, once you get here, you realize that that's not at all what's going on. Not at all what you want to go on.
Do you, have you reread your book, 60, as you're
I
older?
I didn't reread all of it, but I looked at it recently, and I've reread it, I guess, once or twice.
Does it what do you think now about what you thought then about aging?
I think I panicked a little.
You now look at what you wrote then and think, "Oh, buddy, you were a little hot under the collar unnecessarily."
A little bit. I might have been, what did you say? A bit negative?
I said a bit hot under the collar, but just like
Yeah, no,
in a
but
lather.
before you said a bit negative. You thought there was
Oh,
some
my
negativity.
interpretation of the book. Yeah, well, yeah, I yes, I did feel
What
and
did you
again,
think was negative?
well, the first half anyway, it was sort of this examination of all the losses,
Mhm.
and I mean, that's partly my filter, having spent a lot of time, in even in my 40s, and it was the first time I had cancer, like
Right.
and having long COVID recently and think so losses that were presented by health challenges forced me to have to decide what I want to do about this. And I chose to find other like to not dwell on the losses is really all I'm saying, which I resisted at the beginning of 60, but by the end, you start to talk about, um, you've said the aging brain changes in ways that bias it towards optimism. And you talked more about um, oh, something about I need to remember what has truly moved me and focusing on that. Tell me about that because that's the part that I loved in that book. The idea of recognizing, wait, instead of chasing something, and again, maybe this ties in with ego, but instead of chasing something, I'm right here with the cold skin on my t-shirt, or I'm moved by that, or I'm like, tell me more about that because that I find that so beautiful and Fascinating. And as I say, that's part of what got me through health challenges too, is
Mhm,
focusing on what is beautiful in this moment, or what is um, small and delightful, that is comforting, and then I mightn't at my fast-paced, healthy uh, life have had the time or made taken the moment to appreciate.
mhm. Yeah, well, that's well said. I mean, the problem is that you can make more of these things than you need to, which I think to some degree I did. And there's a whole part of the economy that plays to uh, that vanity and to that lack of perspective. You know, that tells you need to have Botox at the age of 31, as a friend of one of my kids uh, said the other day. I said, 31 Botox? Are you out of your freaking mind? But oh, if I rest my face now, it'll be more relaxed later. That crock of horse shit. Anyway, the so that's a problem. Uh, as I've gotten older, I have one of the things I'm interested in is that the number of times I've been through various cycles. The cycle of businessmen thinking they should run the world. Like, I've seen that at least 4 times in my career as a journalist, you know? I've been through it. I mean, they always think that, and then they have a comeuppance, and they say, "Okay, we fucked that up, I'm backing away now." And then they make so much money that they have to believe it again. Or political cycles or cycles of cultural antagonism, between men and women, comes and goes and comes and goes. So you begin to lose, you the obsession, um, with the current events, I guess, the truth of the moment begins to fade away. And I am left with what has, when I think about it, has been the most important question. Like, the stuff that was really important to me, really inwardly important to me when I was young, is the same stuff that's important to me now. It's
Hmm.
just that I didn't realize back then. I thought I was a weirdo for thinking about this stuff, whereas now I realize I'd hit up on something true. And for me, it's knowing what is actually true, as opposed to what's supposed to be true, or
Yeah.
what other people tell you is true, or what you want to believe is true because you'll be cooler, or what someone. And those are those things that move you. Uh, you know, Briefly, the cold, or a great conversation, or something that lifts you out of your, these terrible silos and predefinitions that we all exist in for so much of our lives, even when we're trying not to. You try to get to fresh ground, but it's hard. But you talk to a stranger on the subway, and suddenly you're talking about something you never expected. Something touches. I went to the ballet with my daughter, and Jerome Robbins ballet, and there were people. It's that incredible ballet about the city, and everybody's in unison. But then every once in a while, somebody bursts away
Mm.
and tries to do something new, and then they're back in unison. And I was sitting next to Haley, and we used to have this ritual of going to the ballet and sitting up front, and because she was interested in dance, and she would explain stuff to me and what was hard and what wasn't. And I was sobbing, just sobbing as I was watching this. And I thought, you know, you're a freak. You're just a fool. But now I understand that why I was sobbing, because I was grateful.
Mm.
You know, I was grateful for her, for Haley, for this thing of beauty, for this thing that Robbins, had in many ways, quite a tough and very successful life. He'd made this thing. He thought, this city is beautiful to me, and I'm going to share it. So that I think finding those things that are really true, that has come back. That's what made me want to be a writer. It made me not want to be a certain kind of person when I was younger. Um, and it's still
You can own it a bit more now, perhaps. It's you don't have to
yeah, I'm
it
not
seems like
apologizing. Yeah,
there's no apology for it.
not
Mhm.
apologizing for it.
Well, nor should you. I mean, that's beautiful. Last question, what surprises you about being the age you are now?
How interesting it is. I mean, it's really interesting. I used to read Philip Larkin's poems. I don't know if you've read The Old Fools. Obad is his first one, right? Where he stays up all night wondering when he's going to die. I mean, he was a self-involved shithead. So there's no so. But once you get to The Old Fools, I mean, he's got these people closed in on themselves. He doesn't know what they're doing. They're standing there, mouths agape. They're staring off into and he believes they're revisiting the past, the things they can remember, and they're fully engaged back then. You know, I used to read Obad and think, what is there about getting old that is that is interesting? I mean, it's just terrible. Why do people want to live beyond? I remember my dad saying at one point when he was 95, he'd hurt himself and he was having trouble getting into his chair in the pub, and he'd say, "I'm so sorry." He wanted to be useful. He was a useful guy. And he so wanted to be useful that when he couldn't be quite as useful, he felt useless and he was ashamed and embarrassed. And I used to say, I so love you like this. Uh, I, it's so much better in a weird way than you being useful because you're not digging in the garden, you're talking.
You're just here with me. Yeah.
Yeah, we're my brother and we're together kind of thing, and that's great. I'm sorry, I've forgotten what I you see this here you go. What was I talking about?
You you said that you found this age interesting, and I feel like that's so clear by the way you've talked about it and by the
Yeah,
way you think,
that
and
he said to me, don't get older than 70. And my mother said, "Well, actually, you had quite a good 70s. We went here and we did this, we did that." And he said, "That's right. Don't get older than 80." And she said, "Well, actually, we had quite a good time at 80, blah, 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 blah." And he said, "All right, but not older than 90." And, he made it out to be such a hideous thing. And it was very late. And it was the last 6 months, really, of his life. But he made it out to be so terrible. And those poems make it out to be so terrible. But it really is actually it might actually be the most interesting period because you don't have to cloud the search with all these pretensions that you have when you're younger.
so much uh so much fun and so much wisdom and so much in spite of it all I feel that to look forward to. So cheers to
Well,
you and to your new book 70.
I'm thrilled to have had a chance to talk to you. Thank you.
Oh, well, I'm touched. Thank you, Ian. This was a real treat.